You really are new to this, aren't you?
The big, sweaty man asked from beside me in the driver's seat.
I almost didn't believe you when you said you knew nothing about the Foundation.
The work van bounced through a deep pothole in its faulty suspension. My head collided with the unpadded ceiling, and I was launched momentarily upwards before the belt caught my midsection, returning me to my seat.
This isn't gonna cost me the job, is it?
I asked after recovering.
You said I should be honest, and the posting did say, no experience necessary.
He chuckled, biting down on his trusty toothpick, perpetually stuck at the corner of his mouth. The man had introduced himself to me as Bill, but I couldn't help noticing the name Steve was embroidered across the breast pocket of his brown workman's shirt.
Nah, I ain't gonna fire you. It's slim pickings out there, especially when you're paying minimum wage, hunting for Keter-class entities. What are those? All in due time, kid. For now, we'll start off with the basics. We're not gonna get to the big dogs until you're good and ready. Don't be fooled, though. Any of these things can kill you, or worse. Worse than death? What could possibly be worse than that?
I asked. He thought about this briefly.
Have you ever been to an IKEA?
Yeah.
Try being trapped inside of one for eternity, with no way out. That's what I call a fate worse than death. Fuck me sideways.
I was already confused, but it was getting worse by the second.
Can you just explain all this to me like I'm 5 years old? Pretend like I barely understand English.
He let out another long, exasperated sigh.
That shouldn't be too difficult. Okay, here goes. SCP-101. Actually, scratch that. Let's call it SCP for beginners. Listen closely. I'm only gonna explain this once. There are things out there called anomalies. You've heard about them even if you don't know you've heard about them. They're the ghosts, the vampires, the UFOs, and the Loch Ness monsters of the world. The urban legends and the myths we no longer believe. They are everything we don't understand. The things we fear, and the things we would be terrified of if we only knew they existed. The Foundation keeps them in check. They do more than just catalog and document these anomalies. They protect us all from them, hence the initials SCP. Secure, contain, protect. If these SCP guys are so special, how come I've never heard of them? Well, they're actually pretty well known, if you haven't been living under a rock for the past 15 years. But most people think it's all a bunch of horse shit. If you search the internet for SCP stories, you'll find a lot of results. It's mostly fan fiction, but not all of it. The real articles are hidden in plain sight amongst the fictional ones, so you would never know which were true and which were not. That is, unless you make your own catalog.
The meaning of these last few words would not sink in for a while, but I would eventually come to understand what he meant and who this man really was. But for now, I was still clueless.
Why would such a top-secret organization risk something like that? Why not keep everything hidden?
I noticed we were driving down a dark alley, heading towards a warehouse entrance at the very end. There were no streetlights in this section, and I could barely see except for the glow of headlights coming from the work van, and a second later, Bill turned those off completely. I was suddenly becoming more and more nervous about where this stranger might be taking me. We'd only just met, and part of me wondered how sane he was, especially after this little chat about anomalies and secretive foundations that kept the world safe.
There are other organizations out there too, ones who work in opposition to the Foundation, such as the Chaos Insurgency and the Global Occult Coalition. These groups work to undo the efforts of the Foundation, endangering all of us. They're the ones who leak these stories to the public in the hopes of destroying the secrecy of the Foundation, and with it, their power.
He pulled up in front of the warehouse entrance and parked. It was completely dark outside. and my eyes took a few long moments to adjust to the utter blackness all around.
Where are we? Welcome to your first task force mission. I'm going to show you your first anomaly. Come on, hop out. Follow me.
I did as he asked and followed him around to the back of the van. He removed a bunch of gear that looked reminiscent of Ghostbusters cosplay, which was funny because that was the same thought I had about the brown uniforms he was making us wear. At least the work van wasn't a modified hearse with a crossed-out ghost painted on the side. That was probably on the to-do list for next week, though. Trying to stifle a giggle, I asked what the first item of equipment was. It looked like a child's lunchbox. The man studied my face with a stern and serious expression, as if judging whether I was internally mocking him or not. Most people would consider this man to be asylum-bound based on his statements up until this point, and I got the feeling he'd faced that prospect more than once. He nodded to himself, as if reassured that I was serious.
This is a containment device, one of several that I purchased through black market means. It helps us to secure, contain, and protect. Remember, that's what we're here for. Right. And what about the Paw Patrol logo on there?
He glanced at it for a second.
Oh, that's just a misdirect. Everything the Foundation uses is made to look like something else. Even task force members are disguised to look like cops, EMS, service workers, firemen, you name it. We try to blend in so that people don't notice our presence. If you want to be part of this, you need to learn how to disguise yourself, just like everyone in the Foundation does.
After grabbing several more items and strapping them all over himself, he opened a locked cabinet and removed what appeared to be a very large, futuristic-looking firearm. It reminded me of something out of Men in Black.
Whoa, what the hell is that thing? Shh, keep your voice down,
he whispered.
It's called self-defense. You'll get your own once you've proven you can be trusted with it. Until then, you can't have this.
He handed me something that looked like a taser.
Don't shock yourself with it,
he said.
And don't try to use it on an anomaly. It'll just piss them off. Run away if you have to. Otherwise, you will probably die. Good pep talk, boss.
I followed him to the sliding steel door and wondered how he planned to get us inside this place. He removed a crowbar from his backpack, answering my question. He drove the end of it beneath the steel door and began to force it clumsily upwards. The sliding door became deformed and warped as he jiggled and rammed the steel bar in further, stepping on the end of it to create leverage. Eventually, the sliding door became crumpled and warped enough that we could army crawl our way in beneath it. Bill went first, and I followed after him, taking a deep breath to steady my nerves. Great, breaking and entering, I thought to myself. What the hell was I thinking about taking a job with this nut? Once we were both inside, I stood up and looked around to see everything was pitch black. Bill took a flashlight from his backpack and turned it on, stowing the crowbar inside his bag. With the flashlight on, I could see rows and rows of shelves reaching up high towards the ceiling. All the boxes looked identical, with no numbers or identification on any of them. The shelves weren't marked either. I wondered how the workers in this place managed to identify packages for the purposes of their job. Maybe it was like Amazon, and they had robots going around to pick orders.
What is this place? I asked. It feels wrong, like we're not supposed to be here. That's because we're not supposed to be here. No one is ever supposed to be inside this warehouse. I've been watching it for weeks. It's always empty. No one goes in or out. What the hell are you talking about? I asked, catching myself right after the words came out of my mouth. Sorry. Despite my apology, the obvious insubordination hung in the air between us, and he stood there staring at me for a minute, sizing me up. Are we gonna have a problem here, recruit? I hesitated, trying to think how to phrase my response. I got the feeling I was an inch away from being fired on the spot and being left to walk home from this dark and unpleasant neighborhood. That didn't sound that bad
considering I was getting more and more worried about being arrested. But at the same time, I needed this job.
Sorry, Bill. It's just that this is all a little difficult to believe. I mean, a mysterious foundation that keeps the world safe from creatures that aren't supposed to exist? Anomalies? Inescapable department stores and warehouses with no employees?
There was a skittering noise far off in the distance, in the shadows where we couldn't see. Bill's head turned quickly to look. He glanced back at me and then tilted his head toward the sound. Without another word, he started walking again. I followed after him.
You're not gonna need convincing soon enough. All you need is to see one anomaly, and you'll be a believer for life. The question after that will be, do you want to stick around? Or are you gonna run away screaming and pissing your pants like the last guy I hired?
I rolled my eyes, hustling after him despite my misgivings.
Just hold your judgment for right now,
He said.
Don't jump to conclusions yet about my sanity or overall grasp on reality. Wait until you see the anomaly, and then you can decide what you want to do. I won't blame you if you run. This job isn't for everyone, but if you stay, well, then you're a special breed. And maybe you're meant for this line of work. Some people are destined for it. That's what I believe anyways.
All of his words sounded like bullshit up until that point. I truly believed he was either a very good liar or completely insane. But then all of that changed. We came around a corner, and that was when I saw it. The anomaly. I froze, standing there, just staring at it for several long moments. The creature was at least 20 feet long, and it was undoubtedly an alien. It didn't resemble any sort of animal on Earth, especially one you would see in this part of the city. It skittered and crawled on an incalculable number of legs, moving from the floor to crawl up the leg of a shelving unit. Its body looked like an armored shell, polished black and jagged. It reminded me a little bit of a giant millipede crossed with a Komodo dragon, except much larger than either one. And there was that soul-sucking lack of color to it, as if it were just a shadow or a hole in reality, rather than an actual creature.
What the fuck is that?
I whispered.
SCP-9023 is what I've been calling it. I've been observing it with thermal imaging for a while, but I was never able to get in here up until now. There was an advanced security system guarding this place, but I hired some hackers to take down this whole section of the grid to disable it. Now it's time to do what the Foundation never could. It's time to contain this son of a bitch.
A moment later, he was running at the monster with his weapon held out in front of him.
I'm counting on you. Get ready.
He yelled over his shoulder at me, then began to fire at it.
Ready for what? I don't know what I'm doing.
I yelled back at him, but he was too late. My words were drowned out by the explosive sound of his weapon being discharged. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before, and rattled my eardrums unpleasantly, causing my eyes to water and my knees to buckle each time he pulled the trigger. Bill was firing round after round of bright white energy at the creature, but each blast seemed to be absorbed by its darkness. None of the shots had any effect on it, as it seemed to barely notice them. As the big man got closer, the creature spun around from its position on the shelf. I couldn't believe how fast it was moving, as it rapidly skittered down the leg of the storage unit and raced across the concrete floor. Once it was at ground level, it began to crawl at lightning speed, tracing a blurred path in Bill's direction. He screamed, firing shot after shot at the creature as it backed him into a corner. It reared up like a king cobra, as if to strike him with a bite to the face.
Now!
He yelled at me, but I still had no idea what he was talking about or what he wanted me to do.
The containment device!
He began to scream.
The device! Use the device!
But I couldn't focus as the creature shot towards him, and time slowed down to a crawl. I watched as the thing began to climb up his legs, swirling around his body like a boa constrictor as it began to tighten and cinch around him. Soon it was at his neck, squeezing it as his face turned red and then purple. Those horrible legs were everywhere, digging in with sharp tips that drew blood. With my hands shaking and my mind racing, I tried desperately to think what I could do to help. The taser thing in my hand was useless. Bill had basically told me as much. And then he rasped out the words, barely audible as the thing strangled his windpipe.
Paw Patrol!
He wheezed, and I finally got the message. Oh yeah, I said to myself, pulling out the lunchbox Bill had entrusted me with earlier. The cartoon dogs, wearing police uniforms on the front of the lunch pail, looked absurdly cute and cheerful, in stark contrast to the horrifying situation we were in. But they did make me smile a little bit. Opening the latch, I threw the lunchbox at the monster. It sailed across the room and smacked the millipede creature on the head, making a hollow plastic sound. The lunch pail landed on the floor and sat there looking useless. Just as I suspected, it was a regular lunchbox, nothing special. Or at least, so I thought. After a few long, terrifying moments, the inside of the Paw Patrol lunchbox began to glow bright white, filling the room with an eerie shine. The dark creature turned its attention away from Bill's jugular momentarily, where it looked like it was about to dive in for a snack. It examined the glowing light with confusion, and then it began to get sucked into it. The creature let out a screeching howl as its legs dug into Bill's torso, causing him to scream as well. Spots of blood began to bloom on his brown uniform as the thing's talons dug in further, trying to hang on desperately. It was hoping not to get sucked into the containment device, but it was a fruitless effort. Nothing was going to stop that Paw Patrol lunchbox from trapping the creature, and it did just that. After several long, harrowing moments, the monster could no longer hold on. Its precarious grasp on Bill faltered, and it got sucked up by the rattling, glowing lunchbox. It reminded me of a man holding onto a telephone pole during a tornado, only to be eventually consumed by it, despite his best efforts to hang on. Once the creature was inside the lunchbox, it slammed shut. The thing shook violently for several moments, and then was still.
Damn good job, kid,
Bill said, then began to cough up blood.
I didn't know you had it in you.
I ran over to him, looking at him with concern. The wounds were deep, and he would need a trip to the hospital, maybe to the ICU. Blood was pouring out of him, creating a large puddle on the concrete floor.
We gotta get you to a doctor,
I started to say, but Bill grabbed my arm and told me to listen.
In my bag you'll find a stone. It's blue. Kinda looks like a big diamond, except for the light coming off of it. Hand it to me. Be quick about it.
Without another word, I grabbed his backpack and started rifling through it. There were all sorts of different, strange-looking items inside. There were several glowing stones of various sizes, shapes, and colors. There was a wire coat hanger, a snow globe, a penny, which always seemed to land heads up no matter which way I moved it, a ping pong ball, some dice, a cola glass, and several pencils. Finally, I found the blue stone which glowed and looked like a diamond. I pulled it out of the bag and showed it to him.
What is this gonna do? We need to get you to a hospital, Bill.
He shushed me and told me to hold the stone up to his wounds. After a few seconds of internal deliberation, I decided to do what he was asking. If there was one thing I had learned from today's adventures, it was that the world was far more complicated than I'd assumed. There were hidden things, secret foundations, and anomalies like this one, which had almost just killed my new employer. And after it was done with him, it would have moved on to me next. For the first time, it occurred to me how close I had just come to not only witnessing a violent, brutal death, but also dying myself. I held the glowing stone up to Bill's bloodied chest and watched as the wounds beneath his shirt began to shrink and seal themselves. The blood stopped leaking out, and the flesh mended back together as if time had been reversed. My hands were shaking. They were covered in fresh blood from brushing up against Bill's clothing and the concrete floor beneath him. Regardless, he stood to his feet, looking slightly gray in the face. Wobbling for a few seconds, he coughed and started moving again.
Are you all right?
I asked, genuinely concerned for him.
You really lost a lot of blood. I'll be fine,
he muttered, coughing up a wad of reddish phlegm.
Let's keep moving. We need to make sure there aren't any more of them.
I followed after him, stowing the glowing gem back in his bag and handing it to him.
You've got a lot of stuff in there. What does it all do? Where did you get all those things? Are they anomalies? Stop asking so many questions, kid. I'll explain everything to you in due time. For now, just keep your mouth shut and observe. If there are more of those things in here, we don't want to draw them to us.
I did as he asked and followed after him quietly. I managed to keep my mouth shut for about 30 seconds.
You really think there could be more of those in here?
I asked, too excited by all of this not to ask questions. He let out an annoyed sound, seeming to realize I wasn't going to stay quiet.
There's always that chance. When one anomaly shows up, there's an opportunity for more to enter our world through the same mechanism. That is, assuming they're from another world. Some of these entities have taken up permanent residence on Earth. Others retreat to another realm between appearances. So you're saying that thing came from another dimension? Most likely, yes. Either that, or it is very good at staying undetected.
Bill had some sort of sensor in his hand now that reminded me of a Geiger counter, one of those devices used to measure radiation. He was waving it around in front of him and watching the display as it jumped up and down. He stopped in front of a door. He held the device in front of him, showing me the readout. Whatever this gadget was measuring, there was a fuckload of it behind this door. Bill held up his fist like a SWAT officer about to break down a door for a raid. He held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. And without another word, he kicked the door down. Or at least, he tried to. It took several attempts, but eventually his boot made solid contact with the spot right next to the latch, and the door slowly wobbled open. Inside this next room was absolute darkness. Bill took a tentative step forwards, shining his flashlight around the space as he did so. As he went through the doorway, I realized his mistake. The floor of this new room was riddled with holes like a giant piece of Swiss cheese. Only beneath the holes, there was only darkness. As soon as the big man noticed this, he tried to turn around, but it was too late. His forward progress had already brought him plunging downwards into one of these giant black holes, and there was no way to stop himself from falling. The only thing he could do was to grab onto me, like a drowning man pulling another person under with them, unable to help themselves. The two of us fell into a dark abyss, plunging downwards until we landed in a sickening puddle of black ooze. It was like a tar pit, and I couldn't move inside of it. I tried to kick my legs to swim out of it, but that only made me sink deeper.
Help!
I began to scream instinctively, but Bill shushed me into silence. As soon as he did, I saw there were glowing golden eyes all around us in the darkness. They resembled the same creature we'd seen up above. But now there were dozens of them down here, maybe hundreds of them. This place, whatever it was, reminded me of the Upside Down from Stranger Things, another world tucked away beneath this warehouse. Obviously, this was where the creature had come from. It was the only one that Bill had seen, by the sounds of it, but there were plenty more where it had come from. The monsters began to stalk toward us from all angles, their bodies just barely visible now that my eyes had adjusted slightly to the darkness. I could see Bill standing next to me in the tar pit, covered in dark sludge up to his neck. He suddenly looked terrified as the things came closer to him, closing in quickly with their glowing eyes unblinking. Despite the fact that he had just told me to be quiet, he began to scream. His voice rose into an ear-splitting crescendo as the creatures dove at him all at once, fighting over him like a pack of wild dogs. The sounds of tearing flesh and blood being spilled echoed throughout the cavernous space, and I froze in terror, knowing I would be the next to die. My life flashed before my eyes as I saw things from my childhood I had long since forgotten, and all the important moments of my life. I hadn't thought that was true, but it turns out it is. You really do see it all in that second before your life ends, when you know death is coming and there's no way out. The only difference was, I got out. A rope fell down in front of my face, and for a second I was too stunned to grab hold of it. But then I looked up and saw a pair of eyes staring down at me from above, and a voice yelled at me to take the rope. I did as they asked, gripping onto it tightly as I was lifted up out of the black sludge. The sludge clung to me and sucked me back down, and the rope dug into my palm painfully, drawing blood. but I managed to keep my grip and was gradually yanked out of the tar. The monsters who weren't busy devouring Bill were not happy to see their second course trying to leave, and they leapt at me with their huge, snake-like bodies flying through the air with surprising acrobatics. They hissed and spat black acid at me that sizzled and burnt holes where it landed. I screamed as they grabbed onto my legs and my clothing, digging into my flesh with their sharp talons as they tried to skitter and crawl up my body, trying to wrap themselves around me. I managed to kick one of them off of me, but the other one, which had grabbed onto my legs, was tenacious and wouldn't let go. A pair of voices were yelling up above, telling each other to pull harder on the rope, but I knew there was no way I would make it up there before this thing killed me. It was up to my neck now, wrapping itself around my windpipe. With my hands occupied holding the rope, there was no way to fight it off. All I could do was hang on and scream, and hope I would be pulled out of this dark abyss before I died. The thing squeezed tighter and tighter. I saw the light getting closer and closer, but it was still so far away. I held on until the edges of my vision were turning dark, my lungs aching for a breath of air. The world was spinning, and I felt like I was swimming underwater. My hands let go of the rope. I began to fall again, but something grabbed my wrist at the last second and began pulling me upwards again, and everything faded into blackness as I lost consciousness. For what felt like an eternity, I slept, dreaming that I was trapped down in that black ooze again. In my vision, the hole above me closed just as I was being pulled through it, slicing the rope in half. I plunged back down towards that dark tar pit. It raced sickeningly up at me, making my stomach sick with a queasy rising feeling. Those golden reflective eyes saw me land in the tar, and then were on me in an instant, pulling me apart and devouring me while I was still alive. My eyes snapped open, and I saw I was in the back of a police car.
You're awake. That's good,
said the man in the front seat. I presumed it was a police officer.
What happened?
I asked, feeling groggy.
You're lucky to be alive,
he answered.
Your friend wasn't so fortunate. What happened? I don't remember anything after falling down into that pit with all those things.
The words creature and anomaly came to mind, but I felt silly saying them now, with this rational-looking man sitting in front of me, examining me in the mirror.
You didn't fall into any pit. You and your friend broke into a warehouse where they store some pretty heavy-duty chemicals. Something must have spilled, an odorless hallucinogen. It must have made you guys see some pretty wild shit. Your friend was so high, he actually killed himself. You don't see that very often. What? No. They killed him. I saw them, the anomalies. We went into that room and fell down into a place that... It wasn't Earth. It was somewhere else. You'd do well to just forget about all that,
the man said.
All a hallucination. A figment of your imagination. Produced by some pretty powerful experimental chemicals.
His eyes were watching me closely in the rearview mirror, studying me, waiting to see what I would say.
You should forget all about what happened tonight. I'll take you home.
Paranoid thoughts were racing through my head. One part of me wanted to believe this man. It would be so simple to do that. To accept that he was a police officer and that he was helping me, taking me home after a traumatic experience. But another part of me was thinking about things differently now. After working with Bill for one night, I was remembering his words, the words of my late, great mentor. Everything the Foundation uses is made to look like something else. Even task force members are disguised to look like cops, EMS, service workers, firemen, you name it. We try to blend in so that people don't notice our presence.
Bill wasn't really part of the Foundation, was he?
I asked.
He was doing his own research, making his own catalog, trying to sort out fact from fiction.
The eyes in the mirror continued studying me, looking at me closely. He said nothing.
But you really are a task force member, aren't you?
There was no answer for several long moments.
A member of the Foundation? I don't know what you're referring to,
he said finally. I let out a dejected sigh.
But if I was...
I looked up again, hopeful. His eyes met mine in the mirror.
If I was part of this foundation, as you call it, yeah? Well, I think maybe if I was a part of that, we would be on the lookout for people like you. People with your talents could theoretically be very useful to an organization like that.
Theoretically.
That's right.
The car stopped, and I realized we were parked in front of my house. But I hadn't given this man my address or name. If he was a police officer, he would have taken my statement and seen to it that I was brought to a hospital for medical care. But he didn't do any of that. And I noticed I didn't have any injuries either, despite vivid memories of being grievously injured.
Here we are, Mr. Graves. Take care of yourself. And avoid visiting any more locked warehouses in the middle of the night. You never know what you might find lurking inside.
He let me out of the back seat, since it was a police car and I couldn't open the door myself. The man didn't say another word and got back in his patrol car and put it into drive. I was a little disappointed and turned around to walk inside my home. Part of me had hoped maybe he'd invite me to join the foundation, or at least ask me to come in for an interview. I began to walk away, but stopped as I heard his passenger side car window roll down and a voice calling after me.
Mr. Graves,
the man said. I turned around to see the police officer looking at me intently, leaning over across the passenger seat. He tossed me something and I caught it. It was the colorful Paw Patrol lunchbox. When it landed in my hands, it popped open, and I saw it was empty inside again.
in case you run into any more trouble,
he said.
Once you see one anomaly, they start to seek you out. It's for your own protection. We'll be watching you, and we'll be in touch.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoy these stories, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and check out some more of my episodes here.